Sci-fi as a genre has long been a brilliant tool of social commentary and criticism. The relationship between gender and sci-fi is very expansive, so I want to limit myself today to just 3 works, 2 of which I've covered previously. I'll be talking about Dune, NieR Automata, and Alien. Now, last time I had props, that being the Dune books. I would switch between them depending on which one I was talking about, and that was kind of goofy. This video, I wanted to wear a bandana to represent my goat, Private Vasquez. She's not the Alien franchise's trans character. No, that'd have to go to Lambert from the first film. But she's the Simone de Beauvoir of sci-fi. This quick exchange sums up the whole theme of this video.
Hey, Vasquez.
Have you ever been mistaken for a man?
No. Have you?
Instead, I have my feminist literature. So, Dune. I've spoken about Dune a lot, but I left out one important thing. Dune is misogynistic and gender essentialist. It was a novel of its time, written by a man of his time. Except, well, it's neither of those things when you really view the series as a whole. It's actually fairly progressive. More accurately speaking, it progresses into progressiveness. The series is growing with the reader, with the author, Herbert himself. There are a lot of common themes in sci-fi, and one of the most common is transcendence, transhumanism. The idea that we can be more than our biological constraints. And Dune truly was the birth of modern science fiction. It's inspired by our world, ecology, American politics, Islamic and Iberian history. Other works are the same, like the 2004 Battlestar Galactica reboot being very heavily steeped in War on Terror critique. But they all had something to work off. Star Wars worked off Dune. Dune was that first brave leap, the giant leap for mankind. Dune took our real world and helped it transcend. So, how is this all relevant to women? Well, what is a woman? All of the possible definitions are inconsistent. Chromosomes, genitals, wombs. What we recognize as a woman aren't unifying traits consistent among every person that we wish to deem a woman. A woman is identified with her genitals covered and her chromosomes not being viewed under a microscope. She's identified through 1,000 minute unspoken traits that we've considered to apply to women and femininity as a whole. Chromosomes are important to Dune, however, or at least the first 2 books. The Bene Gesserit strove to create the Kwisatz Haderach, a male with full access to his ancestral memories. The Bene Gesserit could only ever access their female memories. The agony itself was always said to be lethal to men, hence the importance of the Kwisatz Haderach. They wanted to breed a male capable of surviving the agony, for if he could access all of his ancestral memories. Frank Herbert was heavily inspired by the psychiatrist Carl Jung, who put forth the idea of the anima and the animus. The anima is the feminine unconscious of the man. The animus is the masculine unconscious of the woman. Paul describes this in the first book. There is in each of us an ancient force that takes and an ancient force that gives. A man finds little difficulty facing the place within himself where the taking force dwells. But it's almost impossible for him to see into the giving force without changing into something other than man. For a woman, the situation is reversed. Women give, men take. Men exist naturally with a taking force and can easily handle their internal giving force. Women naturally exist with the giving force, and thus the taking force terrifies them.
Try looking into that place where you dare not look. You will find me there staring back at you.
You mustn't speak!
So this is very gender essentialist and misogynistic. However, everything after this, for the rest of the Dune saga, almost exists entirely to deconstruct and subvert this setup. I said that only women can survive the agony, and Jessica in Dune Part 2 also acts as if it's something that women can essentially do better than men.
It's lethal for men.
But she had trained her whole life for the agony. The agony was a Bene Gesserit practice. It was lethal for men because they simply did not teach men their ways. The trait of womanhood was socially constructed. Paul was able to survive because of his breeding and his training under his mother. He was able to compartmentalize his prescient visions not because he was a man, but because he had mentat training. His existence destroys this gender binary for reasons entirely socially constructed. But what about the anima and animus? Well, Dune seemingly holds true to the fact that no woman can access all of her ancestral memories. Until Children of Dune, when, spoiler alert, Alia, the younger sister of Paul, begins to hear the voices of her male ancestors, including the Baron Vladimir Harkonnen. She is pretty much a Kwisatz Haderach already, save for one key fact. She's what the Bene Gesserit call an abomination, that being a human that underwent agony in the womb, opening themselves up to the ancestral memories before having lived long enough to develop their own ego. Because the ancestral memories were stronger than the newborn's own sense of self, they could take over the newborn. In Children of Dune, the Baron takes hold of Alia. So, what does this mean for gender essentialism? Well, it's an unintentional let me talk. It is an unintentional trans allegory. I promise it's a positive one. The word used for the likes of Alia is preborn. Only the Bene Gesserit use the word abomination. And as I explained in my previous Dune video, the Bene Gesserit are far from correct about anything. They're a colonial faith, the two things that Dune as a whole opposes. They're wrong, and they're proven wrong. This abomination isn't an inherent danger. Let's look at Paul and Chani's children. Not their first child, Leto II, but their twins, Ganima and Leto II. The second. Paul didn't really know that they were going to be twins. He probably only had Ganima's name ready. His wife died. Cut him some slack. He's not very good at this. Anyway, Paul's twins were preborn, but they don't face the same tragic fate as their aunt. No, they come to terms with and accept their unique, socially deviant identities. On the surface, Alia is tragic because she's different. She's always been alone. She's always felt ostracized. At 2 years old, she calls herself a freak. But the twins don't have that. First, they have each other. Ganima and Leto have a very close and powerful bond. They find acceptance in each other. The abomination is when your identity is taken over by a more powerful one. When you don't have a strong acceptance of who you are. But Ganima and Leto do. Alia becomes controlled by others. She succumbs to social pressure. And it ruins her. This is pretty queer-coded. And if you look at how it dismantles the established understanding of how the other memories work, it's transcoded. So, what is a woman in Dune? I don't think Frank Herbert knows, and that's okay. He's a lot like Tolkien in the sense where you see over time the author examining their own beliefs and grappling with their inconsistencies through their works. In the final 2 books, the Bene Gesserit are the protagonists, and they fight against 2 opposing forces. The first are the Bene Tleilax. They're a race of whom have no known women, and they essentially rebirth themselves continuously in what are basically clone bodies, using artificial wombs called axolotl tanks. Except for the fact that these tanks are made from their women. The second group are the Honored Matres. They're an offshoot of the Bene Gesserit, and they want to take control of the universe using force. They're violent, both physically and sexually. They're masculine. The first is a reduction to being means to an end, women being objects. They become machines for a male-dominated society that perpetuates and clones the same oppressive, unchanging ideals. The second are women who have climbed the ladder of a patriarchal society. They do what the system has set up. They have to step over others. They have to feed into that oppression. It's liberal feminism. The Bene Gesserit have to create a new society. They have to completely reshape how gender affects our way of life. Chapter House Dune was the final Frank Herbert book. It's open-ended. He had plans for a seventh, but ultimately left things where they were. And I love it, because sci-fi is all about asking questions. Where can we go from here? What do we want to become? What can we become? The Dune series was heavily influenced by Herbert's wife, Beverly, her death being the ultimate reason why he stopped. Dune was written by Frank. He embraced his anima, his femininity. Dune is Frank. Dune is Beverly, his better half. Dune is more than the sum of both of them. And leaving the ending open to us tells us that we are more than the sum of our parts. We're more than our gender. We're more than society. To be naked is to be oneself. To be nude is to be seen naked by others, and yet not recognized for oneself. People like to compare 2B and Bayonetta. My brother did that. He called the latter sexually empowered. Now, whether or not women can truly be empowered through the male gaze is a discussion for another time, but I feel as if he, along with everyone who sexualizes 2B online, is missing the point of NieR Automata. It doesn't sexually liberate its female characters. That's the point. Rather, it confronts the male gaze in a less playful manner than its witchy counterpart. Let's look at their designs. While both characters have their womanly attributes accentuated, the tones could not be any more opposite. The camera lingers on Bayonetta's breasts, hips, and backside as she stretches and poses, putting on a show for the player. The same cannot be seen for 2B. We can see her body, but it's just there. More often than not, the lingering camera is put in the hands of the player themselves. Much of NieR Automata is about the relationship between it and the player, and how meaning and significance is entirely subjective. I made a whole video about it. One such example is the objectification of 2B. It is important to recognize that a sexually attractive woman does not an objectified woman make. Her body is not alluring and tantalizing simply because she is sexy. My feminist literature. The player, however, has the ability to manipulate her placement, and that of the camera, to look underneath her skirt. This is the only time in the entire game where she acknowledges the player's existence. She brushes the camera away. She's uncomfortable. She chooses what she wears, as any woman should, but it is when her consent is violated and she's made into an object of desire does she become uncomfortable. Choosing to repeat this 10 times awards the player with the trophy, "What are you doing?" The game is outright calling the actions creepy. Its rhetorical title asks the player what drives them to do this. This is not to say that NieR Automata is divorced from eroticism. On the contrary, sexuality has been a prominent theme of the entire Drakengard series. The horniness of NieR Automata can be likened to that of Neon Genesis Evangelion. It's not playfully facetious, but painfully real and exposing for the viewer. This trophy is important because there's a much easier way to see what lays underneath 2B's skirt. Self-destructing her. If the player can simply blow off her skirt, why would they ever feel the need to peek underneath it? Well, by contrast, self-destruction is far more uncomfortable for both 2B and the player than that evasive peek under the skirt. A timer appears and counts down as 2B writhes and cries out in pain, being physically violated. While she showed discomfort with the player's actions before, now it can't be read as playful. Media has often used the discomfort of sexual violation, usually a woman being flustered and blushing, itself a way to further tantalize the male viewer, as a punchline to the point where the only way to present a criticism to the otaku is to juxtapose the normalized panty shot with genuine cries of pain. The player is forced to recognize how the woman before them is being stripped of her autonomy. So why would a player choose to discover 2B's secret 10 times over self-destructing her? So they can avoid sympathizing with the object. Through a conversation with the machine Adam and 2B's companion 9S, the game asks the audience, "You're thinking about how much you want to 2B, aren't you?" The text appears on a blank, silent screen. There is nothing to distract the player from the question. Nothing to indicate that it is addressing anyone other than them. How would you fill in the blank space? How do you view 2B? As a rounded character? As a sexual object? We see 9S become consumed by his possessive love for her, to the point where 2B ceases to be a person and instead becomes an idea, one of love, hate, spite, a representation of the machine network, of his failures, of his dark desires. He exists as a twisted reflection of the otaku with controller in hand who views 2B as a representation of their own libido, hiding behind the familiar fun of the panty shot trope in Japanese anime. I hate anime. Nana, exception. Attack on Titan, everything else, no. Much like how 9S has deep possessive desires for 2B, the player may want to discover 2B's secret, to attain a sense of exclusive ownership over her. To be nude is to be seen naked by others, and yet not recognized for oneself. By choosing to see what is hidden from the player in a way where 2B actively shows that she wishes for it to not be seen by them, she becomes a valuable piece of property, one that the player possesses. This is what Dune conveyed. Gender is arbitrarily defined by the way we respond to the idea of gender. The way we place emphasis on 2B not consenting to what we're doing. A woman becomes an object, even if 2B isn't human. She just looks and dresses and stands and screams in pain and agony the way a woman should. Alien is just as depressing. If I were to guess where Ridley Scott was mentally when writing this film, I'd say that the script for it came from a place of male guilt. Anyone can be assaulted, but like I just said, it's feminine to be assaulted. The honored matres are masculine. To be someone who the player does things unto is feminine. To be used is to be feminine. So it's important that the iconic chest burst scene in Alien happens to a man. Reproduction is a natural part of life. This isn't an abomination of nature. This is how facehuggers reproduce. So why is it so terrifying? Because it's happening to a man. Because it's finally real. Cain is reduced to a birthing vessel, an axolotl tank. The poster for Alien is an egg. Not the xenomorph, not the characters. An egg. Because that's the fear. The characters wake from stasis as if they're hatching from cocoons. They're woken by the ship AI, literally called Mother. Mother runs a ship that is claustrophobic. It's a womb, but it's also emblematic of how it feels to be a woman trapped in the birthing cycle by society. But if both men and women in Alien can be birthing vessels, then what defines a woman in Alien? Well, what defines 2B's womanhood? Objectification. In their final showdown, Ripley is preparing to sleep half nude, as you would in your own home. But she's unknowingly being watched. To be nude is to be seen as naked and not recognized as oneself. She's an object of perversion to the xenomorph. She's naked in her own home, her own room, and that's terrifying. Because in a patriarchal society, a woman is always objectified, always reduced to being a birthing vessel. The android 2B is feminine, and the android Ash is masculine. He overpowers and attempts to strangle Ripley with a porn magazine. He bleeds. Look at it! He bleeds semen. Because in a society where women are birthing vessels, any interaction between man and woman is entirely affected by their relationship to reproduction. Mother is called Mother. It doesn't have an identity outside of being Mother. Androids in sci-fi have gender, but that fact demonstrates how arbitrary gender is. They're not human. I want to end this by talking about a character in the center of the thumbnail. One of my favorite characters in science fiction, Jessica Atreides. The name's interesting. We all call her Atreides, but she's not married to the Duke. We just gave her that name because she's Leto's property. She's his concubine. Jessica's identity is tied to the men around her, her son and the father of her son. She's the mother of Paul, the mother of God. She's a deconstruction of the Virgin Mary. Jessica accepted her role as a mother. That was the Bene Gesserit way. She accepted mothering a boy because of her love for Leto. But this motherhood was thrusted unto her. The Virgin Mary accepted her motherhood. She would never have rejected it. No, she was righteous and would thus accept what a patriarch had thrusted unto her. If she wasn't called upon, would she have strived to be the one? I think not. The Fremen called Jessica the Mother of God, but that title was of the Missionara Protectiva. It was again thrusted unto her, and she took it to protect Paul. She took the title to fulfill her duty as a mother. Paul was born a boy because Jessica loved Leto, because Leto wanted a son to continue his line. Paul's birth was upholding a feudal system, an oppressive patriarchal system. Alia's conception was the opposite. It came at Leto's most vulnerable time. When he felt the walls closing in, when he feared losing his family the most, he gave Jessica a daughter. Or rather, she took a daughter from him. Alia is born outside of this feudal system in the deserts of Arrakis. And the moment that Paul becomes emperor, Jessica leaves both of her children for Caladan. She doesn't return until Children of Dune, when Paul has long been considered dead, and Alia is all but consumed by madness. The Reverend Mother never wanted to be a mother to begin with. She simply never had a choice in the matter. One is not born, but merely becomes a woman. But if the woman never had a choice, does the fact that it's a gradual identity even matter? Sci-fi shows us where things can go tomorrow by showing us where we are today. It shows us futures where our entire understanding of science and psychology is so far beyond what we have now that to ascribe current gender and social norms into that future would be limiting. It's inherently a progressive genre. And that's why I think it's so popular. It's why it was created by Mary Shelley in Frankenstein. We all recognize injustice. We feel it unconsciously. And we all want change, even if we don't recognize that we do. Even if we can't define what a woman is.